Hello everyone, my name is Annie Grace M. Cavite and I am the reporter from Group 4 and I am going to discuss the topic which is all about initial state of L2 grammatical knowledge. First, let us define what is initial state. The term initial state is variously used to mean the kind of unconscious linguistic knowledge that the L2 learner starts out with in advance of the L2 input and/or to refer to characteristics of the earliest grammar. Differentiating languages. The basic model coming out of linguistics of adult native speakers and first language acquisition is that language differ in terms of parameter settings. So it says that the basic model coming out of linguistics is mainly syntax, and parameter settings on the other hand. Parameter must be set according to the requirements of the language being acquired. Example given, if a specific language contains the null subject, when we say null subject, it is the absence of the subject in the sentence, or pro-drop parameter. Hence, parameters allow variations in children's language acquisition, id-est or that is different developments of grammar of different languages. Going back, so clearly, to acquire a second language, it requires setting up a second system that is different from the first language in terms of some parameter settings. If you like, maybe you can think of this as different user accounts. Under the same operating system, UG or Universal Grammar, the settings like localization, like desktop organization, though the basic functioning is the same. The initial state and parameter resetting. There are two intertwined questions about second language acquisition that this model causes us to confront. First, what are the parameter settings first assumed in the interlanguage? Next, to what extent can those parameter settings can be changed? Possibilities. The option for the initial state would seem to be basically this. So, these are the following. First, some kind of default state may be the same as the L1 initial state. The parameter settings of the L1 full transfer. Some, but not all, parameter settings of the L1 partial transfer. Some kind of indeterminate state, unset, or unstable setting. Next, the kind of evidence we should then be looking for would be to see what kind of effects there might be of different L1 on the acquisition of L2. That is, what kind of transfer effect there are. We also want to see what extent the interlanguage grammar differs from L2. Are the parameter values flaky? Are they first the L1 values and then the L2 values? And another question is, are the parameter values ever set as in the L2? Next, look at a couple of approaches in a bit of detail and see what is the evidence for them is. First, full transfer, full access. The IL starts off with the L1 grammar wholesale. All properties of the L1 are transferred to the IL. After this, parameter setting can be changed to accommodate the L2 input. Based on my research, IL or integrational linguistics is defined as general or non-generative approach to linguistics that aims at providing comprehensive theoretical framework for the description of arbitrary languages, as well as for contrastive linguistics, linguistic typology, and universals research. Basically, full transfer, full access is transferring first the properties of L1 to IL before accommodating the L2. Next, we have minimal trees. The IL starts off with just VPs, no functional projections, and the tree grows as time goes by. The properties of the L1 BP are transferred to the IL, but the properties of higher functional categories are not dependent on the L1. And last, we have Valueless features. The IL starts off with all the parameters unset, a kind of default state. Before getting to models, let's take a look at what kinds of evidence has been gathered relating to the questions of the initial state. So here are the evidence of transfer. There are at least two angles in which to view the question. First, in places where the L1 and L2 differ, what extent do L2ers initially behave in the L1 way? Do they come to behave in the L2 way? Do they show evidence of any non-L1 or non-L2 way along the way? And second, for L2ers starting with different L1s, what kind of differences are there? Next, Erdem. Erdem has Nadar 1997, L1 Turkish, L2 English, 4 years old, longitudinal case study, spontaneous production, Turkish is SOV neg final, English is SVO neg initial. First 3 months, Turkish values, letter A, I something eating, B, finish no. Second, 4th month and beyond, English values, letter A, you eating apple, letter B, I not eat cornflake. When it comes to Korean, Turkish, Romance speaker learning German, Weinicke and Young Skolten 1994, L2 German, head final V2. Korean Turkish L1, at least 3 advanced 95% of the time. Letter A, Ein Katze Fisch al Essen. I don't know if I am reading this correctly, but it only says that a cat ate the entire fish. Another one, Romance L1, predominantly head initial. The esse the fish. She ate the fish or she's eating the fish. V and YS evidence of headedness transfer. V and YS report a couple of studies where for all the students, the target language is German. One cross-sectional study had 6 Korean, 11 Turkish, and 6 Spanish L1 speakers. Another longitudinal study followed 1 Spanish speaker and 4 Italian speakers. In the VP stage, speakers seem to produce sentences in which the headedness matches their L1, and not German where they differ. Among the Romance speakers, there seem to be 2 steps. Years after arrival indicated were different from the start of study. Files generally every 2 weeks. Differences in the treatment of reflexives. One place where languages differ is in the treatment of reflexives. Himself, herself, etc. There is a universal principle that is generally taken to govern reflexive use across languages. Principle A of binding theory. An anaphor, example given, reflexive, must have an appropriate kind of antecedent above it in the tree, within the binding domain. Languages differ in both what counts as an appropriate kind of antecedent and what the size of the binding domain is. We have here anaphors in English. In English, basically, any DP can be an antecedent, and the binding domain is essentially the clause containing the anaphor. See White's 2003 section 2.3. Mary saw herself. Mary said that Susan saw herself. Bill said that Susan saw herself. Mary said that Bill saw herself. Mary asked Susan about herself. Mary asked Bill about herself. And Bill asked Mary about herself. Let's now move to the anaphors in Japanese. In Japanese, the binding domain for zibunso is much bigger than the whole sentence, but only subject counts as appropriate antecedent, though cf. Japanese Sibun, Z, Sin, local antecedents subjects only. And last we have reflexives in Alto Chinese. L2 Chinese different L1s looking at the binding domain for ZG, self, which in Chinese is a subject-oriented long-distance anaphor. U1 1998 intermediate L2ers but still show initial state. Effect also much less useful evidence from the input. L1 and level percentage long distance. In L1 Japanese we have 92%, L1 English intermediate 53%, L1 English advanced 71%, and in native Chinese we have 94%. For the conclusion, whether the L1 has a long distance, anaphor makes a difference. And that would be the end of my report and the continuation for this topic that will be reported by Elona Marie I. Flavier.